Vienna, Austria's glittering capital. Nestled beside the last foothills of the Alps, it faces the vast basin of the Danube River flowing eastward to the Black Sea. With Germany upstream and Slovenia, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic around it, this is Europe's melting pot that never quite melted. It's here to my father's birthplace that I come every summer with my family, always returning, but never quite arriving, the city that filled my childhood dreams. Vienna was also the site of one of the most explosive moments in modern history. 100 years ago, this city gave birth, painfully, to the most radical new movements and ideas.
Viennese visionaries and demagogues dreamt the dreams and the nightmares that shape our modern lives. In art and architecture, in literature and music, in philosophy and politics, revolutionaries like Freud, Schiele, Klimt, and Schoenberg created the modern world by scandalizing it, while Vienna's terrible apprentice, Hitler, plotted destruction here.
It was in Vienna where much of what we think of as distinctively modern burst forth, where the ideas that still challenge us first were thought. What was special about this city? Why, of all places, here, where an old world lingered that everywhere else had collapsed?
I'm on a personal quest as well. In 1938, my father, a Jew, was forced to leave his birthplace here, yet he returned to Vienna obsessively with us, his family, in tow. I'm trying to find out what drew him back to the scene of this trauma, to this city of dreams.
Vienna is an ancient fortress city with a 2,000-year history. In the 19th century, in the wake of revolutions, it became the capital of the vast but antiquated Habsburg Empire. Politically, it was the last bastion of medieval Europe. By 1900, the end was at hand and everyone knew it. Even the Emperor Franz Joseph, heir to 7 centuries of imperial Catholic rule, even he knew his days were numbered. Free thinking flourished in Vienna's cafes. Artists and visionaries took their coffee beside political revolutionaries. All these dreams, all these nightmares, and in their midst lived the greatest interpreter of dreams the world had ever known. His name was Sigmund Freud. Dreams were the royal road to the unconscious and to the primal urges of the human psyche. Freud was a doctor treating the most modern of ailments, nervousness. His clients, mainly women, mainly Jewish, displayed incapacitating physical symptoms but weren't physically sick. In trying to cure them, this nerve doctor unlocked deep secrets of the human mind.
So, Dr. Freud, what if Vienna is an unconscious, just like our unconscious? What would be the dream of Vienna? What was it about Vienna that made it the town where everything that we think about as the modern first occurred? Why here? Was it an accident that in the same year, Stalin under a pseudonym, Trotsky, Tito, Hitler himself, all inhabited the same city? Why was there this burning desire to be true, to find a true language, a true architecture, a true art? Why is Vienna such an uncanny city? Why is it both homey, feels familiar, but is always pushing you off? What was the Jewish component to Golden Age Vienna? And why did my father come back here? More and more obsessively in his later life. And for that matter, what about myself? Why is it that when I grew up, became a father, I suddenly started bringing my children here? Is it an unconscious drive? Of course he's not going to answer. The cure, what Freud called the talking cure, is something which happens on the side of the patient who is being analyzed. It is by talking. It is by working through. It is by remembering and re-remembering that we get at the truth of the matter. And meanwhile, the analyst sits there. He listens, but he himself remains silent.
Whether or not one agrees with him, Freud shaped the new century. Freud was a prodigious walker. Believing that he uniquely would penetrate Vienna's secret, he stalked the city that fascinated him. These walks were where he analyzed his own dreams, with the city's symbols as his backdrop. Retracing Freud's footsteps, I'll go on my own walking cure. Vienna kept its medieval walls longer than any other major European city. And in the late 19th century, the emperor decided to break these down and build a street that would be the interface between the expanding suburbs and the old town.
From up here, you can see the whole structure of the city of Vienna. At its center rises St. Stephen's Cathedral, a mixture of Romanesque and Gothic, the highest building in sight. And to the right spreads out the imperial court. And in a way, twisted around it are all the palaces and the townhouses of the princes who served the court. So this is the old town. This is, in a way, the altar, St. Stephen's, and the throne. And around it now, there's this great boulevard, this traffic center. This is the ring. And it was here that the bourgeoisie built their cultural institutions. For example, the theater, the court theater, the art museum, and the Museum of Natural History, and the opera. And it was here also that they built their political institutions, the city hall and the parliament, for constitutional rule of the empire as a whole. The story of the Ring Street in Vienna is the story of the city in its golden age.
Vienna's opera. Its architect was a professor of ornament. When the building went up, it was subject to savage critique. One reviewer said it was so heavy, it was like an elephant stuck in the intestines. And even the emperor disliked the building. Wounded by this criticism, the architect killed himself. Vienna is a city where architecture is a matter of life or death.
The ring trumpeted the new power of the bourgeoisie while at the same time affirming allegiance to the emperor. Without a tradition, but desperate to appear traditional, the builders ornamented every facade with symbols. Begun in the 1850s, the Ring Street was a massive project that took 30 years to complete. The first building to be planned was a great imperial monument called the Votive Church. In 1853, the emperor survived an assassination attempt by a Hungarian nationalist whose dagger couldn't penetrate Franz Joseph's thick military collar. The emperor's brother determined that a great church should be built on the spot of this terrible event that would give votive offering or thanks to God for the emperor's deliverance, and a reminder to would-be revolutionaries of the divine power of the throne.
It's hard for us to imagine today what the Ring Street looked like when it was brand new. Because it's old, we can imagine that it was built in different times. The different buildings with their different styles were built in different centuries, but they were not. That Renaissance building over there went up at the very same time as the Greco-Roman building there and the Gothic building that we're standing in here. The trouble with the Ring Street is that it evokes histories, it evokes different styles, but it itself seems without history and without a style.
Vienna City Hall is a great mountain of invented history, another dream of the city's past built in bricks and mortar. In this dream, we're in the late Middle Ages in one of those powerhouse Northern European cities like Bruges or Antwerp, only bigger than anything medieval people actually built. In this dream, the emperor is a protector who shields the city from enemies and who guarantees its traditional rights and privileges. And the townspeople are craftsmen, sturdy ones, who make the city rich through their traditional skills. But with Freud, we have to ask, what's hidden by this dream? What's the reality underlying this fiction? Well, in modern Vienna, the emperor was weak and meddling, and the townspeople, the representative citizens, weren't craftsmen anymore. They were bureaucrats, they were capitalist speculators, and they were the vast majority of proletariat poor, the industrial factory workers. These people are nowhere found represented in the building which was built to represent them.
Freud held that we never forget our past. Thrust from mind, the past vengefully returns in the form of haunting dreams and crippling symptoms, not only for individuals, but for cultures as well. What we cannot remember, we are doomed to repeat.
The Ring Street isn't a complete circle. Part of its path is formed by the Danube Canal, the quay along the Danube Canal. And on the other side of that water, on the island formed by the Danube Canal on the one side and the Danube on the far side, lies the second district, Leopoldstadt. And it's there that all my personal stories are set.
This was once Jewish Vienna. Here Freud spent his childhood, and here an astonishing proportion of Vienna's cultural vanguard was born and raised. It was also the home of my father, Henry Kerner, until he was forced to emigrate to America in 1938, where he became an artist. Later, he started obsessively to paint the city and brought his new family, my mother, my sister, and myself, back to Vienna every summer. For us, who were Americans, the city seemed strange and desolate.
So empty and sort of lonely was it here that we used to, because it was so unlike the United States, where things were actually ugly, but they didn't have a kind of a sort of strange sadness that places had here. So we used to have competitions over the most depressing streets. And we really savored that feeling of that was really verlassen. It was completely deserted, etc.
Barbara Timmerman is a tour leader who guides returning Viennese Jews through the changed landscape of their childhood. A few additions are uncanny reminders of the Nazi era.
The tower itself, that anti-aircraft tower, with 1 year after the war, that playing children somehow got inside and they blew up the remaining ammunition. Yes. 2,500 windows broke from the houses around because of the detonation. But nothing happened to the tower without those little remaining cracks. Yes. That was it. But still, nobody would be able to imagine this park without that anti-aircraft tower.
Yes. I must confess that my father was obsessed with these bunkers. He called them bunkers.
And he painted it from many different views, and he loved the fact that there would be naked people, more or less naked people, sunbathing in front of it, having a sort of good time, and then up would rise this dark thing, and
I think he saw it as a place where people could turn away and pretend the past didn't happen, but the past always came back.
The construction of the ring did keep the city's artists busy. Receiving their training at Vienna's conservative Academy of Fine Arts, they learned fluently to paint or sculpt in the manner of every imaginable bygone era.
The paintings in the Parliament show what was expected of a ring-style painter. On the one hand, encyclopedic knowledge of the past, of historical styles, of architecture, costume, and painting itself. On the other hand, complete obliteration of the present moment.
As Freud would have predicted, the repressed would violently return, and nowhere more spectacularly than in the building of Vienna's university. Progressives reasoned that here, of all places, where the sciences flourished, there should rise a modern building, one fitted to the work of reason. But instead, the builders borrowed from Renaissance Italy because, so they argued, the university had its historical roots there. It was in this building that they employed a young Viennese artist who could plausibly evoke the art of the past. In the 1890s, Gustav Klimt was the most spectacular young painter working on the buildings around the ring. But by the time he received the commission to paint a ceiling cycle representing the university's academic faculties, his ambitions had become more complicated.
When it came to the execution of these paintings, they were totally different from the spirit of the Ringstrasse. They expected from him allegories of philosophy, let's say a woman who represents philosophy and then some philosophers in togas in the antique manner.
The pictures here are facsimiles. Like many of Klimt's key works, they were destroyed in World War II. Marian Bizans-Praken has spent 20 years studying and curating Klimt's work. What's philosophical about that picture?
Well, the key figure of this allegory is the figure in the foreground. And she is called Das Wissen, or knowledge.
You mean that face?
That face in
That
the
face.
foreground, that face with the very open, staring eyes.
So it's sort of like a thought bubble, as it were, like in a cartoon. This is what Das Wissen thinks about.
You see the stream of life is passing, and the stream of life is not a very positive or happy event. They are cover their faces or have their eyes closed, are in a kind of a state of dreaming. Maybe the thought that that the philosophy, the knowledge is there, but not accessible for the people. She stays a mystery too.
So we see actually in other paintings in this room that weren't the cause of a scandal, nude figures. What is it about the nude figure, particularly the one that I believe was most scandalous, the woman sort of being carried up on the left-hand side of medicine? Why that's not allowed?
I think it's the very sensual way of representing, and she is represented from a lower point. So her shame is also the hairs of all his female figures, which were very well shocking for the people. They mostly had red hairs. And this was shocking, and the way, the very dreamy, sensuous, sensual way they were represented.
Yes,
well.
it's more specific, less generalized.
And very erotic.
Whereas a more traditional way of representing the nude was to kind of give you a general view of her so that you didn't feel implicated in the nude. Whereas here, because we're placed down and we feel ourselves placed down looking up at her, we are implicated as voyeurs, or that might have been one of the feelings that made people uncomfortable.
Yes, that's true. And he does not care for is it shocking or not?
Yes.
It is reality, it's the truth.
Klimt's paintings unleashed outrage, first among conservative members of the university faculty, and then from the popular press, who declared Klimt's art to be ugly, corrupting, and secretly Jewish. Ultimately, the pictures were never put in place. Disaffected, Klimt turned his energies elsewhere. Principal founder in 1897 of the Secession, he now used this new institution as his public stage. The membership of the Secession decided that they needed a permanent place for their exhibitions, and they were given space on the ring to build the building, but they decided that it would be so radical a building that it was too daring to place in that spot. And so they moved their site outward, out here, a couple of blocks from the ring, and here they erected what really is one of the world's most radical architectural departures. There's no building like it in Vienna. There was no building like it in the world. It's a windowless temple of art. And it looks forward to all those modernist ideas of what a gallery should be, as a white space in which art can appear in a kind of pristine environment. The Viennese still called the building by its popular nickname, the Cabbage Head. Its young architect, Joseph Albrecht, refused to raise a staircase or open a skylight into the dome's interior. As he put it, it was the building's secret. The words on the facade encapsulate the secessionist creed: to each age its art, to art its freedom. The secession was a movement, a venue, and a building wrapped into one. Its core value was modernity. Members seceded from the backward-looking historicist style of their fathers, fashioning themselves as rebellious sons, celebrating the new. Inside, the secession was an exhibition space, not a museum. Divided by movable walls, its galleries displayed contemporary painting and sculpture together with applied arts, hoping to transform the whole of existence, everyday routines included, through timely beauty. In the Secession's most famous exhibition, Klimt communicated a personal myth. Humanity stands in pursuit of happiness. It falls prey to carnal pleasures, but it is ultimately redeemed by artistic genius, embodied by Vienna's demigod, Beethoven. Freud held that the sex drive could be healthily channeled into art. Klimt shows similarly how the life force can be sublimated through genius, as lead might be turned alchemically to gold. Klimt's output afterwards includes some of the most iconic works of modern art. Mainly portraits, they are also his retreat from the public to the private in the face of savage criticism. But his clients, some of whom were patients of Sigmund Freud, discerned an eroticism still burning under their ornamented surfaces.
I'm up inside the Secession's secret, its golden dome, and from up here the working space where the exhibitions are held looks almost like a factory. How different it is from that other building you can see from up here, the academy, the institution in a way that the Secession set itself apart from. From up close, the leaves look like big pieces of Art Nouveau jewelry with the green paint on the one side and the yellow paint on the other side, and this hand-painted circular form making the light flicker on them. And from the way they've done it, it's as if they've given themselves a laurel wreath of victory over tradition.
The nerve center of Vienna's cultural avant-garde was the city's legendary coffee houses. Literary circles like the Jung Wien, Young Vienna, could linger day and night sipping a single espresso while trumpeting their youth by breaking the taboos of their elders. This cult had a real-life hero in the poet Hugo von Hofmannsthal.
The valley of dusk was filled with a silver-gray fragrance like the moon seeping through clouds.
In 1891, literary Vienna awoke to a flawless, beautiful poetry.
The silver-gray fragrance of the dark valley caused my sleepy thoughts to blur. Silently I sank into the weaving, transparent sea.
The mystery author wrote under the pseudonym of Larice. He spoke of nature and history and Vienna itself as if from an Olympian remove, as if life itself were his own fabulous, fading dream.
A maze of plants through which a yellow-red light as if from topazes glowed in warm stream.
A spellbound public speculated that such language, such vision could only come from an old man, perhaps an aristocratic genius, singing his swan song. When the publishers invited this literary cipher to their favorite cafe, they were greeted, however, by a schoolboy in shorts who came up to their table and announced himself. Hofmannsthal, I am Larice.
Driven by gigantic,
The amazing revelation that Hofmannsthal was just a schoolboy
of strange shape.
made people wonder whether experience itself might be just a dream. Dreaming also featured in the work of the writer Arthur Schnitzler, a Jew with roots in Leopoldstadt. To get inside his characters, he pioneered a new way of writing, which records the inner monologue or stream of consciousness occurring in the mind. Used much later by James Joyce and a cousin to Freud's talking cure, this enabled Schnitzler ruthlessly to penetrate the external facades of the Viennese soul.
Doors doors on either side opened, and there the ladies were standing motionless, each with a dark veil covering her head, brow, and neck, and a black lace mask over her face, but otherwise completely naked. And the fact that each of these naked beauties still remained a mystery, and that from behind the mask large eyes as unfathomable as riddles sparkled at him, transformed his undesirably strong urge to watch into an almost intolerable torment of desire.
In the spirit of Schnitzler, I have a rendezvous with literature professor Constance Fliedel in the Orient, one of the many discreet hotels off the ring you can still rent by the hour. As a student, she had the enormous task of cataloging the 10 volumes of Schnitzler's diaries.
He had the strange idea to record the number of his orgasms, and he noted it down in his diary, and there is a list of, you see, of monthly totals and of yearly totals.
Like an account book.
Right, we are here in August 1890, and you see there's a monthly total of 30 and a yearly total of 160. And he took the numbers down. On the 5th of August, it says Mitzi Nachmittag bei mir 5, which is Mitzi, his friend, Marie Glümer, called Mitzi at that time, was with him in the afternoon, and there is a number of 5 orgasms.
So is 5 unusually many, or is that disappointing?
Well, there are even higher numbers. There were even 2 Mitzis at some time.
2 Mitzis, I see.
2 Mitzis, yes.
He had a rather clinical relationship to his sexuality in a way.
In the early years, in the 80s and 90s, he was obsessed with sexuality. I think you can say that, like many of his contemporaries. But in his works, he started to describe a society where you have these facades, the bourgeois facades, and behind there is exploitation of poorer women, of these süße Mädel who were sweet young girls who were lower class or lower middle class and were exploited by their bourgeois lovers.
Yes.
And he took the side of the women. This free life of the turn of the century society, Vienna, is just one side, and the other side is anxiety and angst and a big pressure on each sexual part.
Yes.
Maybe you want one. Very good. Wasabi. Nehmen wir ein paar?
Yeah.
Very good. Passt gut zu Zigaretten, Alkohol.
It's good for coffee, tea.
Good. Good for sex.
And also good for sex.
Before sex.
Before. Okay, how much is the whole thing? 200 euros.
I think a little bit more.
Just across the street from the Secession's heavenly dome, there's an entrance to Vienna's underbelly.
So where are you taking me?
Well, I'm taking you down into the main sewer of Vienna.
Brigitte Timmermann takes movie buffs on her third-man tour of Vienna's sewers.
Harry, tell me a little bit about what was going on here, say around the year 1900 in Golden Age Vienna.
Oh, Golden Age Vienna had a dark side to it as well. Well, 1850, Vienna had a population of about 500,000. 50 years later, it was 2 million people. It was a fast-growing city, and there was a lot of housing shortage here in Vienna. So you would find thousands of people living in the sewer and also making their living down in these sewers. You can imagine it was pretty grim down here. It was smelly, it was very damp, then loads of rats. In the good old days, it was the so-called Strotter, and they would live from scouring reusable stuff from the sewers, and they were divided into 3 castes.
Castes, as in levels of society.
Exactly, levels of society. And those collecting metal, you know, this could be spoons, it could be pieces of jewelry. They were on the top rung of the social ladder.
The very low social ladder.
Yeah,
the subterranean ladder.
It was a subterranean ladder. You know, in the middle rung were those who would collect bones, which they would sell to glue factories. And then on the lowest rung of the social ladder were those who were collecting grease. You know, and they would scoop the grease from the surface of the water, put it in a bucket, and then sell it to soap factories.
This must have been incredibly unhealthy.
Oh, it was incredibly unhealthy, and of course these people only survived on booze. They were paid a pittance, and they would immediately buy booze for it. You know, and it was very cheap booze, as you can imagine.
So they were drunk and fishing for fat in the sewer.
Yeah.
This particular place actually features in The Third Man, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it was, and that's the place people remember. He would climb across the railing, but Orson Welles would only climb down halfway, and then there was a cut, and then you see his double walking along the top of that weir. Then you see the sewer police abseiling down this weir and disappearing through that tunnel. It's the most spectacular part of the sewer.
In the movie, it's a little like the unconscious of Harry Lime himself, right?
Oh yes, very much so. It was a synonym, it was a symbol for evil.
Yes.
It was really a symbol for evil.
Yes, yes. So it's a kind of psychic diagram of the person and of the city.
Of the person and of the city, yes. So Freud would have loved it.
I recently detected a distinct goulash odor. Do you think that there was that somebody flushed their goulash down the run?
Could be.
By shuttle.
Yeah, could be. Ah, fresh air. Fresh air.
While part of Vienna descended into misery, another ascended, publicly marking this rise through the housing they built on the ring.
In the 1880s, when they were built, these grand edifices were called rent palaces. The wealthy bourgeoisie who rented their homes here could imitate the pomp of aristocratic palaces in the inner city. In the noble townhouse, the prince and his family occupied the grand upper floors, and the servants squeezed in into stories above those. But here the edifice is subdivided into differently priced flats, so that no one really is represented by the facade, but everyone can share in its grandeur, while meanwhile the ground floor is given over to commerce, to stores and offices. The aristocrat's house expressed his nobility, his noble bloodline, through symbols, through coats of arms, portraits of his ancestors and their illustrious exploits, and so forth. Here, the symbols are abstract and impersonal. That's because the people who they celebrate, the bourgeois renter who lives under those ornate windows, they have no momentous history, no august genealogy. Here today, they'll be gone tomorrow. Unlike the aristocrat, they are private individuals. Indeed, this is the class that invented privacy.
As a child, we were never invited into any of our neighbors' apartments. though the neighbors were always eerily present. They loitered in the halls when you climbed up the stairs, then ducked into their houses, immediately opening their peephole to watch you as if unseen. My father liked to wave at those eyes peering out at us. When you left the building, they would follow your progress, rushing to the front window just as you stepped onto the street. In the United States, I was used to the opposite. You could enter your neighbor's house, even open the refrigerator and take a glass of milk. This was simply unthinkable in Vienna.
This is Otto Wagner's solution to the urban home. He gets rid of all the distinctions among the stories, except the big distinction between the public, the stores, and the private above. And he embellishes the private with this amazing and innovative facade made out of ceramic tiles so that it's weatherproof. And this makes the inhabitants of these apartments feel like they're living in an eternal springtime.
Architect Otto Wagner was Vienna's great city planner. A founder of the secession, Wagner understood architecture in total terms. He built these Art Nouveau-style apartments in 1898, not long after the Ring was finished. I managed to persuade long-term resident Mr. Ebner to talk to me about living here. He suggested it might be best if we talked outside his apartment.
You see, Art Nouveau at that time, when we moved in, 1964, was not en vogue at all. Yes. Yeah? Nobody cared about it. Everybody thought it is funny. Yeah? And when we looked at this flat for the first time, my wife looked at it, and she phoned me at lunchtime, and she said, "Oh, it is very beautiful and very well designed, and it looks south, and there is nobody opposite, and so on. But there's one drawback," she said. So I said, "Oh, what's the drawback?" She said, "It is such a queer house." At that time, it was a queer house.
Yes. But are you proud of the facade by now?
By now, yes. And as far as I heard from other people, in the old days, 50, 60, 80 years ago, every 2 or 3 years the fire brigade came and just with a hose washed it down.
So it's very practical.
Very practical.
And I noticed the stairs, you don't walk down them, you float down the stairs because they're so beautifully.
Yes, that is a speciality of Otto Wagner, because he was not very good in walking up and down. And so he did it for himself, actually. Yes. It is very easy even to run down. Even at my age, I can run down. It is comfortable, and it was a good thing it is comfortable, because for 5 or 6 years, from about 1964 to up to in the early 70s, the lift didn't work.
Otto Wagner's most ambitious project was designing Vienna's urban railway.
Achtung, Bahnsteig 4, S-Bahn nach Handelskeh fährt ein. Bitte Vorsicht.
Wagner understood the metropolis physically and psychologically. Earlier than anyone, he perceived that transport was the key to modern city life.
The station at Hernals is one of these beautiful Otto Wagner stations located in the outlying districts of Vienna.
In all the details, in the way the lighting and the tiling is done, Wagner introduces into the everyday lives of commuters efficiency, rationality, and beauty. The rhythmic decoration gracing everything assumes something basic about urban life. The city makes people nervous. It bombards them. Small wonder people here began to isolate and examine nerves themselves. Freud started his scientific career searching for the elemental nerve by dissecting spinal cords. The name for this nervous state of the new was modernity.
I can't imagine a contemporary commuter railway station building a waiting room with proportions as generous as these.
There's no rational reason for it. There's no economic reason for it. This is a working-class neighborhood in Vienna, and yet Wagner, when constructing a rational railway, irrationally uses too much space to make people happy when they go to work. Wagner's vision was so democratic, he actually expected everyone to use his railway, even the Emperor Franz Joseph. Wagner built this pavilion close to the Emperor's country palace in 1899.
Wagner imagines the Emperor coming into the station along these amazing lines in the carpet. He comes in through the door. He's guided by these beautiful lines to the center. He sees that this center is also Vienna up there, surrounded by its walls. And then he, the Emperor, is guided out of this pavilion along lines towards the platform where he's supposed to take off.
The Emperor only used Wagner's station and his railway once at the opening ceremony. As he put it to Theodore Roosevelt, "In me you see the last monarch of the old mold." And so he continued to make his daily journey from his palace in the city to his palace in the country on horseback, in a gesture as antiquated as the dying dynasty he represented.
Radiating out from Vienna are all the streets going out to the outer neighborhoods. Down these routes went Otto Wagner's trains, and it enabled Viennese to come in from the suburbs, hit the ring, see all the representative buildings, City Hall, the theater, the opera.
And the edifice that was purpose-built to represent the empire's peoples was the Parliament.
As a child, my father's favorite building by far was the Parliament. He was convinced it was the most beautiful edifice on earth, and it transported him beyond Vienna to some timeless world, some other place. This was partly the architect's intention. They were faced with the task of building a parliament in a city which had no democratic tradition. And so they scratched their heads and they reached back to another time and place and built Athens in the middle of Vienna.
With 11 different languages and no translators, and with disagreement on just about everything, Parliament was an embarrassing babble to its supporters.
They were Czechs, Polish, Ruthenians, they came from Ukraine, Slovenes, Croats.
Parliament may have been ineffective. It may have been counterproductive. In the discord of its debates, it might have hastened the disintegration of the empire it tried to represent. But Parliament was also popular theater, and Viennese queued up for hours to get tickets to the bleachers to watch the spectacle. People filibustered in languages that no one understood, and they spoke for hours there while people threw ink pots at them, stamped their feet, and in general made a kind of uproar.
And one means of protesting was the so-called clapping of the desk covers.
One young man sat in these bleachers often. Coming from a little town in Upper Austria, he became fascinated by the spectacle of politics in action. He loved the way the speakers screamed and the way they gestured, and he came to loathe parliamentary democracy.
And he also came to believe that the German minority had given over far too much power to the ethnic groups, to the nations, and he felt that he personally could restore Germany to the position of master race. The name of this young man was Adolf Hitler, and Hitler had his political apprenticeship right here. Hitler would go on to obliterate parliamentary democracy. But coming to these grand halls as a young man, he certainly would have gotten a taste for power.
These violent struggles revealed the weak spots of democratic rule. But to Hitler, these weaknesses also showed a different kind of power, the power of blood, of ethnic identity. In Parliament, Hitler learned how politics could reduce itself to the distinction between friend and enemy. That the enemy and not some abstract ideal was what galvanized politics.
Karl Lueger is Vienna's most favorite mayor. He's still commemorated in countless statues and street names. Charming and famously handsome, he unified Vienna's diverse populace by coming up with a particular idea. He invented for them an enemy, the Jews. The Jews were the capitalists and bankers who were oppressing the little man. They were also the avant-garde artists who were scandalizing petty bourgeois sensibility. For Lueger, anti-Semitism was a massively malleable concept. He could use it in many different ways. As he famously put it, I decide who's a Jew.
There were more virulent anti-Semites in Vienna than Karl Lueger, but Lueger made Jew-hating mainstream. This was the terrible lesson that Hitler took with him to Germany. Few foresaw the future. Even Freud, prophet of the modern psyche, remained oblivious. He had struggled with hatred, heard the clamor vilifying his psychoanalysis as the immoral work of the godless. Yet he identified himself as Viennese, eating boiled beef, dressing in hunting garb, and relaxing in the Alps like the emperor. Imperial Vienna seemed immutable to him, while the rationalist in him equated change with progress. There was cause for hope. Anti-Semitism was born in Vienna's golden age, and that age was, to a surprising extent, the product of Jewish creators and patrons. Hence their blindness and their penetrating insight. So when Freud walked around the ring, he was acting out both his belonging to and his strangeness from Vienna. And all the while, funneled by the traffic, he looked inside himself, while some of the trouble lay outside in what was happening in the city. Just off the ring, the Leopold Museum, part of the city's new museum quarter, testifies to the contemporary currency of Vienna's fin de siècle legacy. It houses works by Klimt's scandalous successor, a brilliant draftsman who eroticized the art of drawing itself.
Egon Schiele was probably the most obsessive self-portraitist of the 20th century, in the sense that not only did he do numerous self-portraits throughout his career, but he also decided to do the self-portrait in the most honest, in his terms, way possible, namely to undress himself and to show himself naked, to observe himself, actually technically, naked in a mirror. I mean, if we just take, for example, the area which would have been probably most scandalous then, and in some sense scandalous to this day, namely the exposed genitals. What does he see when he looks at his genitals? Well, he sees their form, he takes it apart, he anatomizes it. What it is a kind of dissection of the body, first into its strange parts, and then a transformation of these parts into a kind of decorative pattern which is simultaneously beautiful and in a way ugly. For example, the thigh creates this beautiful, almost arabesque-like shape, the way he decides not to put his feet into the picture, and the way he pushes up his arm just at the upper framing edge of the picture creates an ornamental whole. One thing that's striking about this drawing is the way the limbs are cut off by the framing edge of the picture. How do you see that coming about in Chile?
Here see you the influence of photography, especially of snapshot photography. Snapshot, yeah, because when somebody made a photograph of a body in motion, yeah, he could not say, stay here, and say, I have you in the center of the image.
Artist, curator, and theorist Peter Weibel shocked Vienna in the 1960s with provocative performances, including offering his partner's breasts in a box for the public to touch. Sexuality in his work was no mere motif. It was an action that blurred the boundaries between artist, artwork, and audience.
I think what was really unique about Chile at that time was the mastery of the nervous line.
Nervous line.
And this nervous line means you tremble. He's able to make a normal line. For example, here he makes a normal line, curved line of a leg, but then here it is a nervous line. But then here we see here the shaky line. Dissolving more and more, and the closer it comes to the abyss, to the female genitals, the more and more it gets nervous. It loses completely control. When you have a naked woman in front of you, offering herself with open legs, open arms, it's clear that you get nervous by looking at her.
Yes.
So the gaze makes you lose your control.
Right.
He loses control more and more, the closer he comes to the spot of danger. And to have pleasure is precisely that you lose control. And that the lines are completely out of order, not following anymore the logic of the anatomy. They are following the logic of the desire.
Is he actually deliberately moving like this?
Yeah, he trained himself. He trained himself. He made exercises. I'm sure.
Oh, really?
He made, for hours he exercised to get how to make this nervous line perfect.
These drawings don't go on public display. Their content still proves too controversial for Vienna.
The darkest part of the drawing are these two bits.
Exactly. He shows a, how do you call this?
Armpit.
Armpits, you see the armpit. It was already, I think, at that time a promise of sexual pleasure. A promise when a woman opened her armpits. This was the first step for opening the legs. Because you suddenly could see the hair, which was an advance of the pubic hair.
Yes.
But the armpit hair is not so dangerous, so he could make a full
safer.
drawing. It's safer. And here, when it is much more dangerous, it disappears.
Freud's most scandalous thesis was that infants were already sexual creatures. Innocence came later, painfully. Schiele often took pubescent girls as his subjects. He was arrested for abducting a minor and jailed for exposing children to his pornographic drawings. Whether these drawings observe sexuality in their models or project it onto them, they remain troubling even today. At 1900, breaking taboos made people famous, and then as now, bad publicity was better than no publicity.
Michaelerplatz punctuates the old city. And here rises the great Baroque facade, the entranceway to the imperial castle. This is Baroque art at its best, and it was here that the city decided to regularize the square, tear down some of the old buildings. And this left a space to build a new structure. The builders of this building chose a firebrand architectural critic, Adolf Loos, to design the structure. They must have known what they were doing. This was a man who had written about ornament as a crime and who had complained about the Ring Street as a mere paper facade. Adolf Loos complained that if you had marble or if you had stucco, it was not real marble, not real stucco, it was poured concrete nailed onto the exterior of the building. And it was that kind of deceit, that kind of falsehood that Loos wanted to do away with. By clearing away ornament, Loos not only struck a blow against the twin monsters of falsehood and bad taste, he also wanted to reforge an ancient link between truth and beauty.
His interiors demonstrated the sheer beauty of materials, of wood, of stone, of metal and glass and leather. And by using expensive materials and by treating them simply, he brought out their sensual appeal. He foreshadows all the best of modern design.
It was rumored that the emperor hated the Loos house and that he drew the curtains of his palace, blocking the view of that modern, unornamented facade, those windows without eyebrows.
If you really want to find where modern art really takes off in Vienna, I don't think you go to Klimt and Schiele. Even though they were scandalous artists and they broke with tradition, they still remain linked to ideas about figuration, about emotion, just about what an image is that is far more traditional. If you really want to see the birth of the modern, you come to the Michaelerplatz and you look at the facade of Adolf Loos, because this is representation stripped bare. This is the blank canvas. This is the 0 point of Austrian modernism.
The house that Ludwig Wittgenstein designed for his sister seems frozen at this 0 point.
This is less like a home than like a full-scale, three-dimensional model of what a home should be. Everywhere you see logic at work. There's no curves, no hidden corners to hide it. And indeed, there are no curtains, no carpets, no chandeliers, and originally all the rooms were lit by naked light bulbs. This door handle, for example, which took the philosopher over a year to design, it's a door handle that shows what it is.
The functionality is obsessive here. The ceiling, when it was first built, had to be raised by a mere 3 centimeters so that it could have the proportions Wittgenstein demanded.
Wait a second, okay.
There's nothing more deflating from modernism than when its purified forms don't actually function. But then Ludwig Wittgenstein was not famous for his architecture, however radical this building is, but for his philosophy. And his philosophy was centrally concerned with establishing the narrow limits of what it can say and do. His first book, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, made him the most influential philosopher of the modern age.
Wittgenstein sought to describe what the world looks like to a completely isolated individual. Using the powerful new tools of modern logic, he tried to explain how the mind, through language, can possibly reflect the world?
Wittgenstein does with language what he does here in the house. He strips it bare. He demonstrates that there are certain concepts that cannot be put into words, like God, art, and history. They are unsayable and meaningless. He believed that language could only refer to facts. Everything else, everything of importance lay outside of language. Or as the Tractatus states, that whereof we cannot speak, we must pass over in silence. Wittgenstein's book is a poem of solitude. It opens with a lone voice declaring that the world is what language can say about the world. There are no counter-arguments here, just certitude. And with certitude, the voice also concludes that the important things of human life can't be said. And so the voice remains completely alone. Just days after Wittgenstein began writing the Tractatus, a Serbian nationalist assassinated Franz Joseph's heir in Sarajevo. While the modernists grappled with isolation, people were asserting their identity through fierce belonging to a group. In its final days, the Habsburg Empire was riven by its ethnic divisions. The death of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand plunged Europe into 2 world wars, both fueled by ethnic hatred. In 1944, while Vienna was being pulverized by bombs, my father, Henry Kerner, painted his first real painting. He shows his parents in the intimacy of their living room. Having heard nothing from them since 1942, he had to work from memory, reimagining his childhood home in a street called Am Tauber in Leopoldstadt. He does the work of mourning already, of saying and refusing to say goodbye. In 1946, my father seized the opportunity to return to Vienna as a war artist in the Allied occupation. For days he wandered the ruined capital, unable to face Am Tauber and his family home. A flood of memories returned, which he wrote down in a short text titled The Unfinished Sentence.
In it he recollected the day in 1938 when Hitler entered Vienna. Locking themselves into their apartment, his family heard the sound of people weeping for joy. There Adolf Hitler, an Austrian, had returned to make Austria great again. That was my father's most powerful memory, a noise he had never heard before and would never hear again. The sound of people literally weeping for joy.
Originally, there was a temple here in this street. Yep. And those white columns now indicate the site where they were.
Amazing.
So you can see, absolutely massive. Huge. You can see the height. It indicates the real width of the main facade of the Leopoldstädter temple.
And how many people fit into that building?
It had room for 3,500 people. This temple was one of 96 synagogues temples, praying rooms here in Vienna. There's around
96. Amazing.
96. And especially when you imagine that 10% of the population around 1900 was Jewish here in Vienna. So about 220,000 Jews were living here in Vienna around 1900. And that was their biggest temple.
So this street on a Saturday would be packed.
Absolutely, would absolutely be crowded. And when you go down to the right, to that corner here, you can see the mosaic to give you the colors of the facade, of how they look like in very Moorish style.
Jewish community's version of Ring Street style.
That's it, yes.
Yes. And what happened to most of them?
Well, all of them except one were completely destroyed, what we call the November pogrom. In English, you would probably call it the Kristallnacht. The flames of the burning synagogues mirror in the broken glasses of Jewish shop windows. And that looked like crystal because the fire mirrored in there. So that's why the fascists, where the Nazis called it Kristallnacht, because for them it looked like crystal.
Like a beautiful thing. Just a few months after the Anschluss.
That's right. So that Kristallnacht that happened all over Europe the same night, same time.
When my father finally reached his neighborhood, he found it in ruins. The great North Station landmark of the area was badly bombed. Immigrants from all over Europe used to stream through its gates into Vienna and along Am Tauber. In the unfinished sentence, my father describes the scene.
On the corner, the grocery store was open. The only store spared in the whole street. Frau Busch stood at the door. It was she who told me what I had known all the time. Her voice was unmoved. It had an undertone of satisfaction, but the tears formed in her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. A puff of wind blew through the broken building. I looked up to the room in which I was born. I loved and belonged to that empty space behind that torn curtain.
So when my father returned here in 1946, he saw this house in ruins, and he looked up to the window where he was born, and he saw that it was gone, his home. And they built it higher than it originally was. So I'm a little higher, and I've actually never been here, even though I lived in summers on that far house on the corner there. This last building in the block, those windows there is the corner where we lived when I was a child. I used to like looking at this painting because I could look through my father's childhood room into the windows of my own childhood room.
My father never told us the exact circumstances of his parents' death. He probably never knew them. We, the rest of my family, wondered why he didn't try harder to find out. Sometimes we wondered whether they managed to survive, a possibility that made my father's silence more baffling. This stage of my journey takes me to Vienna's great chronicler of silence, Gerhard Roth. He's allowed me to enter his home and to share with me recent discoveries he's had of his own intimate history.
Ja, meine beiden Eltern waren Mitglieder der NSDAP.
Both my parents were members of the Nazi Party and didn't want to talk about it after the war. Wanted to be the best kind of Austrians there were, wore traditional costume and made me wear traditional costume.
Mich gezwungen, Trachtenkleidung zu tragen.
Suddenly, the majority of parents in Austria were being asked by their children what they had done in the war. And the majority of parents refused to give an answer to that question.
In dieser Zeit gemacht haben. Und der Großteil der Eltern hat sich aber geweigert, darauf eine Antwort zu geben. Ich bin dann, als meine Eltern verstorben waren, in die Archive gegangen und dort habe ich dann festgestellt,
And when my parents died, I went into the archives, and then I was able to confirm that my father was already a member of the Nazi Party in 1933. And I also found he had a child out of wedlock. You see that in your private life, sexual secrecy is closely interwoven with political secrecy.
Wir müssen davon ausgehen, in Österreich,
you have to realize that in Austria there was an authoritarian distance between parents and children. The whole imperial monarchy and the previous era of the First Republic and the Nazi era were all marked by hierarchies. And in a hierarchy, communication is only from top to bottom. You're not allowed to question from bottom to top.
Wird nur von oben nach unten gesprochen. Und daher war es in Österreich,
and that's how it was in Austria, which has been ruled by the Habsburgs for 650 years. And also usual in the case of Catholicism, that people kept silent about everything, and especially about sexuality. And much later about the Nazi era.
Später über die Zeit des Nationalsozialismus. Ich glaube, dass die Wiener und Österreicher,
I believe that the Viennese and the Austrians are gradually reaching a half understanding of this period, because the Nazi era is no longer taboo. But what happened previously was necessary in order to make the arrival of a Hitler possible. Hitler didn't descend from heaven, but Hitler is a product of this authoritarian, hierarchical, ordered society, which was formed in the Habsburg era.
Die sich in der Zeit der Monarchie gebildet hat.
Music is Vienna's most powerful cultural legacy. Here Haydn, Mozart, and Beethoven, Schubert, Brahms, and Mahler worked, and the classical style was born. And it was here at Habsburg Vienna's moment of destiny, at the eve of World War I, that this legacy was shaken to the core. To his admirers, the composer Arnold Schoenberg liberated dissonance. To his detractors, he transformed music into noise. And in 1913, in one of the era's noisiest cultural controversies, Schoenberg's composition caused literally a riot in the music hall. While angry members of the audience shouted insults, reporters rushed back to their offices to declare the young composer insane. Today, Vienna has embraced Schoenberg forcefully, dedicating a center to him and his musical influence. Christian Meyer is its director.
So Schoenberg, in his revolutionary moment, unleashes dissonance, but presumably this created a problem for him as to how to create structure. How does structure come in Arnold Schoenberg's work?
Well, around 1908, 1909, Schoenberg had no structure. His atonal music, his three-tonal music is strictly anarchic. He says dissonance is as beautiful as harmony, and it's a new harmony, and that's a revolutionary step, that he doesn't seek for a resolution. He just says what he has to say, and then he jumps on to the next thought. in the tonal system, there's one tone, which is like the C in C major, which has a four role, which is like the king in a political system. And what Schoenberg does is he's democratizing the tones, because it takes all the 12 half tones of the octave and gives them equal rights. Critics already said these are Demokratengeräusche, noises of Democrats, which had a very bad context at that time.
For people who were anti-democratic.
Of course, everyone was anti-democratic. No one could imagine a democracy to be a working system.
Yes.
It came very close to anarchy, and anarchy was really what nobody wanted. After all, it was an anarchist who killed the last Habsburg emperor.
Yes.
Wassily Kandinsky, who got to know a Schoenberg concert, the painter who got to know a Schoenberg concert in 1911, he heard, and he writes a letter to Schoenberg, whom he hadn't known before. He writes to him, "Dear Professor Schoenberg, I just heard your concert, and I must say that what you have achieved in music is exactly what I want to achieve in painting, and haven't found it as yet." So by listening to Schoenberg's music, Kandinsky realizes what he has to do in painting to get what later on is the first abstract painting in art's history. So the reception of such people is of extraordinary importance, because there would be no abstract painting without Kandinsky listening to Schoenberg, or at least much later this would have happened. Of course, this completely new kind of music was just appropriate to describe the horrors which were to come. Like in The Survivor from Warsaw, how would you describe the horrors of the Holocaust and of the ghetto in Warsaw, other than with these 12-tone possibilities?
I'm back where I started. In front of Franz Joseph's votive church lies the Freud Park. In Vienna, the future presses uncannily up against the past. But would Freud have had his insights if his city were not as rigid, overstructured, and transparent as it was, so like a crystal? Viennese modernism was ahead of its time because in its moment of flowering, time itself seemed at a standstill. My journey's finished, but the words on this monument continue to speak. The voice of reason is soft.
After my father returned to his home, found it empty, heard the terrible news, his first instinct was to flee the city, to flee Vienna. But he decided instead to walk once more in the Vienna woods, his parents' most beloved place. And when he left Vienna, the first thing he did was to portray them in these woods. In the painting, my father depicts his mother and father on two different paths in a fork like this. His father is walking in a characteristic way that people then and now in these forests do, holding his hands behind his back. His mother has stopped to rest on a stump. The picture doesn't tell you outright where they're going. In fact, part of its mystery is that you won't know where they're going. All suggests departing, dying, last farewells. After my father died in 1991, I decided to seek answers. These were uncannily easy to find. The Nazi authorities kept precise records of their crimes.
On June 9th, 1942, my grandparents were loaded onto trains bound for Poland. 3 days later, they reached Volkowitz, where passengers were put onto cattle cars. They arrived at 10:03 in the morning at Malotrostanek, near Minsk, on the 15th of June. An eyewitness report says that all passengers surviving the journey to Malotrostanek were packed into sealed trucks in the woods behind the railway tracks and gassed. Steinhof, Vienna's huge hospital for the mentally ill, rises from the city up into the Vienna woods. At its highest point, pressed against the forest, stands the world's strangest church. Built by Otto Wagner, this nerve temple for Vienna's restless souls rivets together disparate times, ancient worlds with the shiny hardware of the present and with obsolete prophecies of a time to come, a future of the past. Freud learned that memory heals. He also found that remembering was not the whole cure. Patients who had uncovered their trauma often retained their symptoms. Painful memories took time to heal.
Freud's city is like a patient in recovery. Having suffered intensely the trauma of becoming modern, its healing has been slow. But returning to Vienna today, I have glimpsed a changing, vibrant city that has finally learned how to remember.
Vienna's becoming a world capital again. Its borders to the east reopened, it draws tourists from the former Habsburg territories who seek here a bit of their old identity. And beyond the city, Vienna's visionaries loom larger than ever. We are only now catching up with Wittgenstein, Freud, Schoenberg, and Otto Wagner. Vienna shimmers below me like a dream, completely familiar, yet utterly strange. Why is it that, always a visitor, I call this my home? Is it because the ghosts from Vienna's past, the ones I've pursued, were strangers here too? Is it because all homes are at bottom secret and strange?